with the responsible government in question.
Speaker, it doesn't matter what the government thinks about Bill C-234. It doesn't matter what the Senate thinks about the bill, because taxation and spending are the exclusive right of this House, not the Senate. In our system, there is no taxation without representation. Section 53 of the Constitution says all financial legislation must originate in this House. Standing Order 80 says that this House alone grants aids and supplies. When will the Prime Minister direct his representative in the Senate to respect this democratic institution, the only democratic institution in this country, and pass the tax bill?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, the irony coming from the other side of the House is almost too thick to handle today when we hear members' office talking about respecting democracy or democratic institutions. There's a pattern of behavior here that I thought was, maybe just with the Leader of the Opposition. I didn't expect it from the member from Wellington Halton Hills, but as he would know, there are no Liberal senators on this side, only Conservative senators. The Senate is independent. Unfortunately, they're bullying senators to force them to step back, and that's totally unacceptable, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, we used to live in a country where the governor regularly ignored bills passed by the elected Legislative Assembly. We used to live in a country where the appointed upper chamber used to regularly ignore bills passed by the elected lower chamber. That was a country long, long ago whose institutions were abolished after the rebellions of 1837. But now the unelected Senate thinks it's some sort of Chateau, clique, or Tory compact, ignoring a tax bill passed by this elected House. Again, when will the Prime Minister direct his representative in the Senate to respect the right and will of this House and pass the tax bill?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of respecting the will of this House, perhaps the Leader of the Conservative Party would like to talk to the Conservative senators that sit in his caucus and ask them to pass the bail reform bill that was passed by this House of Commons. The Leader of the Opposition thought it was so important that he was going to recall Parliament last summer to pass it, and Conservative premiers regularly talk to me about the importance of passing that legislation. So perhaps he'd talk to the Conservative senators about that important bill to keep Canadians safe.
L'honorable député de Mégantic.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Mr. Speaker, with the holidays approaching, after 8 years, we can see that this Prime Minister is in panic mode. He's desperate. Bill C-234 would exempt farmers. It's blocked, the GST for farmers, and it's blocked in the Senate. And he's asking unelected senators to kill this bill, even though it was passed by elected officials here in the House of Commons. Why is he using unelected senators to run counter to the Constitution and undermine farmers and Canadian families? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, let's keep talking about respect for democracy in the House of Commons. The Conservative senators, who are also unelected, are hindering passage of an important bill on gun control, and it was passed here in the House. So if our friends opposite, Mr. Speaker, want to do something for democracy, they should ask Conservative senators who sit in their caucus to pass Bill C-21, which was passed by the House of Commons to protect Canadians against illegal guns in Canada.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution is very clear. Section 53 of the 1867 Constitution Act states that all money bills must come from the House of Commons. And the House regulations are also very clear. These money bills cannot be amended by the Senate. These maneuvers to bully senators goes against the Constitution, it goes against House rules, and it goes against democracy. Will the Liberals stop with this unconstitutional filibustering of Bill C-234 and end these carbon taxes on farmers so that people can actually feed their families at Christmas. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, once again, the Conservatives like to pretend in this House, like to claim that they're trying to protect Canadians, for example, from firearms violence, or ensuring that bail is effective in helping keep communities safe. Conservative premiers, such as Premier Ford, have asked for this. So if they want to send a message to their Conservative senator friends tomorrow at their caucus meeting, that would be a great idea.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal government is costing Canadians more and more. The Liberal carbon tax on farmers is driving up the price of food. And I would remind you that people are already struggling when it comes to grocery costs. The Conservatives are proposing a common-sense measure, which is to scrap the Liberal carbon tax on food production. That's Bill C-234, which is in the Senate. Everybody is with us on this. It's just the sore losers that don't agree with us on this. Why don't they tell their unelected senators not to be holding up this bill? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to see the Conservatives' double standard on the Senate because they've used it to block legislation they don't like. They don't hesitate to do that. I'd also like to point out that in a recent article, independent senators were bullied by a Conservative senator at the request of the Conservative Party of Canada. That's not the way things work in this place. We don't tell the senators what to do. That's not how it works, unlike the Conservative Party of Canada. The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, the fact in my riding is, and I'm sure it's the same in Montreal, the fact is that food banks are overrun, not with food, but with people coming to use the food bank. People who used to contribute to food banks are now relying on them. Over 2 million Canadians are using food banks. And our proposal is to help farmers, to help bring the price of food down. But the Liberal government wants senators to defy the will of the elected House. Is that what you call democracy? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. I find this a bit strange, Mr. Speaker, that the Conservative Party never mentions the $1.7 billion in support for farmers that we give them all across the country. It's also interesting that they never talk about the impact of climate change, which costs farmers hundreds of millions of dollars, and that number is constantly rising. And speaking of the Senate, Mr. Speaker, media reports show that a Conservative senator, at the request of the Conservative Party, has been bullying other senators. And this was orchestrated, this campaign of violence was orchestrated by the party, Mr. Speaker. Before I proceed to the member for Belleuil-Chambly, I'd just like to remind all members that even in our comments, even if you don't have the floor, it's still important to use parliamentary language. And people should not be accused of lying deliberately, even by hecklers.